Have you ever felt the deep importance of your cultural heritage? What if you made it a priority? How would your life and the lives of those in the future change? Stay tuned now for an all new episode of One. Hello, everyone, and welcome to One. You're watching One presented by the Breakthrough Show Network. I'm your host, Jessica Dugas, and I'd like to introduce you to our one guest. Please welcome a native Italian and the owner and founder of the military editor agency, Brunella Costagliola. Brunella, welcome to the show.
Hello, and thank you so much for having me.
I'm so excited to have you here, and I'm excited to dig in to your story. So would you do us the honor of telling us your one story?
Of course, I'll be very happy to. Well, first and foremost, as you've mentioned, I'm a native Italian, and I was born and raised in southern Italy, on a small coastal town called Bacoli, which is to the west of Naples. And being Italian, obviously, English was not my first language. Italian was. As a matter of fact, Napolitan was my dialect, which has been recently been given the title of language once again. So I spoke fluent Napolitan and I spoke, of course, fluent Italian, but not English. And that changed quickly when at the age of 5, I saw for the very first time a concert, a Michael Jackson concert on TV. It was during Christmas time, and I simply fell in love with the music, the dance, and the rhythm. But there was one problem. I couldn't understand anything he was talking about. So I asked my mother why I couldn't, and she explained to me in elementary terms that a 5-year-old could understand. I couldn't understand what he said in his songs because he spoke a different language. He spoke English. So for that reason, I decided that I wanted to learn the language. And fortunately for me, my parents were very supportive. They did not dismiss this interest of mine, even though I was so young. And they worked very hard to be able to afford a private tutor. And at the age of 5, I began studying English. My passion for the English language and American culture, which of course also came with my understanding of the language, especially as I reached a level of knowledge of the language that allowed me to translate Michael Jackson songs. I also began to fall in love with American culture, Black American culture in particular. So I wanted to take this interest to the next level and truly fulfill it as my mission, my goal. I decided to embark upon an academic career that took me to Naples for my bachelor's degree in English language and culture, as well as Japanese language and culture. But then I also moved to the Netherlands to study at Leiden University for 2 master's degrees. One was in American history and the other one was in American literature. And I simply wanted to turn my passion for American culture and the English language into my profession. So after I graduated with my 2 master's degrees from Leiden University, I moved to England in Cambridge. That's because my then fiance and now husband of 12 years, that's where he was stationed. He is recently retired, but he spent over 20 years in the US Air Force. And actually, we met in my hometown of Naples in Italy, where he was stationed there on a special duty assignment. So I felt like my passion that started at age 5 came full circle. Not only in my professional life, because I decided to embark upon an academic career focused on studying the language and American culture, but also personal life, because I ended up marrying an American man whose name is also Michael. Although, trust me, he does not have the same dance moves as Michael Jackson did. So, but that is just unfortunate. But anyway, when I was in England, where I moved to be with my fiance, I decided, well, you know what? I just want to take it a step further, even more, and truly harness everything that I've learned and turn it into a career. So I decided to become a teacher of the English language, and I studied at Cambridge. When I was studying at Cambridge to become a teacher, my teachers were, all of them but one, native speakers. One of them was French. And I remember I tried so hard to mimic a British accent. And trust me, oh my goodness, I sounded ridiculous. So one day, this French teacher came to me, and with all the tact that she could master, she came to me and said very kindly, look, stop trying to sound British. You do not sound British. It doesn't sound right. And I took it. I took the advice and I stopped sounding British. But what she said to me stuck with me. And she told me, you are you. You are unique. Embrace your accent. It's not something you need to be ashamed of. I don't believe she understood, or probably she did. I don't believe she understood how important that advice would turn out to be in my entire life. I keep thinking back to what she told me: embrace your accent and be proud of your accent, because your accent basically represents an entire cultural heritage. So I took the advice. At the time, however, I did not really understand the value of the advice that she gave me. I simply thought, I sound so ridiculous. She just wants me to stop. And I eventually earned a certificate of English language teaching to adults. So I began teaching English as a second language. And I became the tutor and the teacher that I had since age 5. So once again, I felt like my life was coming full circle. After England, I married my then fiance, and we moved back to the Netherlands for his career. So once I became a military spouse, my career as a teacher stopped because I had to leave England, where I had been teaching. And I followed him to the Netherlands. And then after the Netherlands, we moved to the United States of America, which had always been my dream since I was a child. And in the US, I didn't want to stand out. I wanted to be considered as part of a group. I wanted to belong. So my first reaction for the first few years that I lived here was to assimilate. I wanted to assimilate into American culture, also because I felt that the image many people have or had of Italians here in the States was somewhat a stereotypical image, mainly portrayed by TV shows, movies as well. And the stereotypical representation of, say, the Italian man who doesn't speak well, has a very thick accent, which was something that I had been, concerned about with me, who is not the most law-abiding citizen, and who is not well educated. And at the same time, the typical Italian woman was mostly depicted as the woman who stays home, who has a million children, who just doesn't stand up to her husband, no matter how much she suffers because of his infidelity, or a very subservient and submissive woman. I didn't see myself portrayed in the way that some American media portrayed Italian people, and I didn't see myself represented. So, because of that, I was afraid that if people knew I was Italian, they would immediately assume that all Italians are the same way that American media portrays them. And unfortunately, even though I tried so hard to assimilate, as soon as I opened my mouth, my accent came out. And people would often compliment my accent for how they said exotic it sounded. And there were positive words that came with complimenting the accent, or at least I took it in a positive way. But my own insecurities played a big part in the fact that I began to feel as if I was standing out. And that was the one thing I did not want to do. It's probably also because I'm an introvert by nature. So the less people see me, the better I feel. But, I also felt like my last name especially was hard to pronounce. And it immediately gave it away that I wasn't a native or, an American citizen. For example, whenever I went to, say, the doctor's office and I had to wait for the nurse to come to the waiting room and call my name, as soon as she started trying to pronounce my last name, he or she would somewhat get stuck on the GLI. So instead of Costagliola, he or she would say Costa, and it was this being stuck there that made me feel like I was panicking. My name, I am so different, and I don't belong here so much that people can't even pronounce my last name. It also didn't help that whenever that happened, people would immediately, other patients in the waiting room would immediately start looking around to see who was the person with such a weird last name that nobody could pronounce. So I felt very much under the microscope. And as I said before, it could have been my own insecurity with being a foreigner, and having left my home country that gave me this impression, but I couldn't help the way I felt. So what I did was I wanted to assimilate, and I wanted to erase everything that connected me to my Italian roots. I began by celebrating only American holidays. 4th of July, you found me there with an American flag. Also because, having always loved the United States, I wanted to pay my respect to the country that had welcomed me and adopted me. And I stopped celebrating Italian holidays. Instead of cooking traditional food that in Southern Italy we would eat, say, for Christmas, and something that I had, being raised and brought up with all of these family traditions, I decided, no, we have to do this the American way. So out the door went all my Italian traditions, and accepted were just my American ones, my new American ones. And that worked until I became a mother. When we were in the Netherlands, our son was born. And sorry, when we were in England, our son was born. And when we were in the Netherlands, we moved there when he was only 9 months old. But when we came to the States, our daughter was born, and I became a mother of two. Once you become a mother, something happens. Something changes within yourself. And that's what I felt happened to me. Suddenly, my own discomfort, my own insecurities went out the door. And I knew that my children had to come first. But what also surprised me was how important my Italian traditions that I had previously thrown out the door became to me, because I realized I am the only Italian in this household, in my beautiful little family. I am not surrounded by an Italian community. At the time, I lived in North Dakota, so there wasn't that big of an Italian community there. And I understood that it was up to me. It was up to me to hold on to my Italian heritage if I wanted my children to learn who they truly are. Yes, they are, of course, American citizens. They basically spent their childhood here in the States, including my son, even though he wasn't born here, but he's an American citizen. And English is their first language. And yes, they do celebrate American holidays, but I came to a point where I felt, if I don't teach them about our stories, our traditions, what food we cook during Italian holidays, or say shared holidays like Christmas, what are they going to know about their cultural heritage? They are American as they are Italian. And it's up to me to make sure that they learn about their Italian heritage. I think it was thanks to motherhood that I decided I no longer wanted to assimilate, meaning I no longer wanted to completely erase my Italian heritage to be able to feel like I was part of the United States of America and I was an accepted member of society. Out the door went assimilation and welcome acculturation. I decided, you know what? We celebrate Christmas, and then on January 6th, we also celebrate La Befana. It's an Italian holiday, and it's linked to our Catholic faith, but the commercial holiday basically represents this old lady, which some people call a witch, although I'm not really sure she's a witch, who on January 6th, actually the night of January 5th, flies on her broom across Italy and delivers presents to children all over the country. And I taught my children about La Befana. I began cooking food that my family cooked for me when I was their age for our Italian holidays. And that's how I began making peace with the fact that I too am Italian American. I'm not just American, I'm not just Italian, I'm Italian American. And I have found a way to make both cultural identities coexist within my household. It's thanks to my children, really, who made me understand, if I'm not the one who teaches them about their Italian heritage, who is going to? And one day I simply understood that if I don't do that, if I don't teach them about where their mother came from and also where part of their ancestors came from. One, they'll never know who they truly are. And two, this is all going to end with me. My grandchildren will never learn because I never taught my children. So, what I also began doing was teaching them Napolitan, my dialect, my native language. Because you see, Southern Italy and Northern Italy have very different stories. Even though we are one nation now, we are a very young nation. It was only in 1861 that Italy became one nation. Before then, we were two separate entities, and as such, we have very different history. The south of Italy, Naples, my hometown, was the capital of a kingdom, and Napolitan was the official language, which then was declassified and downgraded to dialect after Italy became unified and we adopted Italian as our official language of the country. But teaching my children Napolitan also meant to me teaching them about the kingdom of Naples, the kingdom of the two Sicilies, as it was called back then, meant teaching them about how many people tried to take control of southern Italy, because Napolitan is nothing more than a beautiful mix of Spanish, Arabic, French, Latin, Greek words. And these are all the people throughout history who tried to conquer southern Italy. But then what happened was, as Napolitans, simply, it was like going to a beautiful buffet, right? That you have all of these different things that you can eat. And if you eat them all, you're just full and you don't feel good. So what Napolitans did, or at least this is the way I described it to my children, they went and picked a little bit from every bowl of food and they created their own meal, which then turned out to be Napolitan language. And I felt that unless I was the one to truly embrace my heritage, my children were never going to learn 100% who they truly are and where they also come from. Their story is not just Italian, but their story is also not just American. So, because of that, I made peace with goodbye, assimilation, hello, acculturation. We are a bilingual and bicultural family. And it was through food and through the many myths and legends linked to every food that we prepare on every holiday that I was able to begin teaching them about my Italian heritage and therefore their Italian heritage. And it didn't stop there. When I became an American citizen, during my naturalization ceremony, I was surrounded by so many other immigrants who, just like me, were there because they had a dream. They had the American dream. And I know it sounds cheesy, but I did have my American dream, which I was able to fulfill. And as I was standing there surrounded by people from virtually all over the world, I remember the judge who was officiating the ceremony telling all of us that the United States, as it says in the motto itself, e pluribus unum, is nothing more than a beautiful mosaic of so many different cultures coming together to create one beautiful masterpiece. And that is the United States of America. And she encouraged each and every one of us during our ceremony to not give up our cultural heritage, but to embrace it and to share it with everybody who'd be interested in learning about it. So it was so inspiring to me what she said that it made me want to take it a step further. So outside of my home, outside of my household. And I started thinking, how can I contribute to this bigger conversation that is diversity in the United States of America? When I first came here, so many people, well, I thought people assumed that just because Italians were represented a certain way in the media, books, movies, TV shows, what have you, then that's what they were going to think of me. And don't get me wrong, unfortunately, I did have some experiences with people whose first question was, oh my goodness, is your family one of the families like we see in The Godfather? But ignorant people are everywhere, and racist people are everywhere in the world, not just here in the United States. But I understood, thanks to what that judge said and thanks to my own experiences, I understood that I needed to contribute to the narrative of diversity and acceptance of diversity in the country. So I decided that I wanted to write my own books where I could share about my myth, my cultural heritage, which also includes, of course, myths, legends, history, lifestyle, folklore, you name it. I just wanted to share about my Italian culture as well as my Neapolitan culture. So, being a writer by trade, as you've mentioned, I own the Military Editor Agency, which is a writing and editing agency catering exclusively to military authors and military related manuscripts, but working in the American publishing industry for the past 10, 11 years. After I gave up my career as a teacher to follow my husband around the world with his military career, I became a writer and an editor. So I thought to myself, how can I use what I learned in my personal life about embracing my culture and sharing my culture with my children? How can I translate it into my professional one? So the first thing I did was writing my own books. And however, as every writer will tell you, quite a few years go by between having a brilliant idea and then having the courage to actually sit down and write it. So I started outlining this this middle grade novel that I've been working on for quite some time now, and I wanted to share stories also through mainly children's books. And the reason why I chose this target audience, so children, is because I'm a firm believer that books help raise our children. And as such, I have a much bigger impact on future generations than I would if I were to write within the adult genres. So I began writing children's books where I add bits and pieces of my culture, and not in the stereotypical way that has so often been portrayed. So I could leave it in the form of the written word. And the written word will stay much longer in this world than myself. I want it to be outlasting. I wanted my work and I wanted my stories about my cultural heritage to stay well beyond my time here. And that is why I chose this way of communicating about my cultural heritage, is through writing books for children and hopefully have an impact on not only Italian American children, but also on children who see themselves represented in my books. I also began helping other authors whose voices had been previously marginalized by society because perhaps considered part of a minority. I began helping them, making their voices heard through my writing skills. So I became an advocate for people whose stories, whose voices had been previously put to the side by the publishing industry, by the mainstream publishing industry. And it's through each and every story that I help my authors as well as myself share their own uniqueness, their own cultural heritage, and my own cultural heritage, so that future generations know about these stories and are not forgotten in history amnesia. Every story counts. Everybody has a story. Words matter. And that is the reason why I became also a cultural accuracy reader for Italian culture. Not only do I work as a writer and an editor, but now the publishing industry has finally realized that there have been so many mistakes made previously about cultures not being represented properly and respectfully because of assumption and because of stereotypical representations. So now the publishing industry has opened up to the idea of cultural accuracy and representing a culture in the appropriate manner, which means that, for example, if somebody is writing a book about Italian culture, they come to me and hire me as a cultural accuracy reader, and I let them know what is correct and what instead is an assumption, or perhaps worse, a stereotypical representation of my native culture. And just like me, so many other people are now becoming cultural accuracy readers so that we can ensure that every culture is represented properly. And sometimes when I look back on my path as an immigrant in this country and as now an incredibly proud Italian American, I mean, during that naturalization ceremony I talked to you about, I don't believe there was a prouder American there standing and holding the American flag. It was truly the fulfillment of a lifelong dream of mine to become an American citizen. I look back on my, as I was saying, on my path as an immigrant to this country and see that I went from wanting to just disappear in the masses and be accepted as one of them, and not wanting to stand out, being very careful of how I pronounced words because of my accent, thinking that my last name was unpronounceable for American speakers, when truly sometimes all it takes is saying, well, let me show you how to pronounce it. And people sometimes are recipient to that, and they go along with it and they try their best, and most of them succeed. Others instead just shrug, dismiss me, and go about their way, but that's okay too. But as I look back, as I was saying, what I truly notice is how important that advice that my English teacher from France told me and gave me so many years ago, when she said, don't be ashamed of your accent. Embrace it, because it's what makes you you. And then it goes all the way back to the naturalization ceremony and the American motto, E pluribus unum, out of many, one. And indeed, that's my one story.
Thank you, Brunella, for sharing that incredible story. There are so many pieces and so many parts to your story. And I also find all of those little pieces a mosaic of who you are today. But I would love to ask you, How did going back to your roots and embracing your own culture, embracing your own heritage, how does that change how you look at the world today? How does it change how you look at other countries and further the human beings that represent the other countries of the world?
It's a wonderful question, and thank you so much for asking me, because I think while it starts in the household, first and foremost, it starts with accepting who you truly are. And that is not limited to just your cultural heritage. That is a much bigger conversation, is an umbrella statement that can be taken and considered for so many different things. But first and foremost, you have to accept who you are. You have to accept your journey. Once you do that, please share it with those you care about. Please share it with the rest of the world, because it is in our uniqueness that we find our strength. And my entire personal life became so much better, but also so much more authentic once I understood the importance of my cultural heritage. I had nothing to be ashamed of. And what I did, I had this incredible baggage that I could gift my children, my husband. I, with them, I could let them know this is where you come from. Also, yes, you're growing up in this beautiful country that has given me so much, but this is also where you come from, and you should know about that. You should be aware of your cultural heritage. You should embrace it and celebrate it, because every time that we deny ourselves the beauty of our own uniqueness, not only do we do a disservice to ourselves and our family, but we also do a disservice to society. What if we all conformed to what? What is the ideal? And honestly, one of the things that truly made me understand the importance of embracing my own native culture was seeing so much diversity here in the States. I can't tell you how often I go and participate to cultural festivals that highlight so many different cultures and heritage here in the US. And every country has its own stories. Every country is different, yes. However, what unites us is that we're all here in the US. We are all what makes this beautiful mosaic a beautiful mosaic. So our strength lies indeed in our own uniqueness, and it's important to share it so future generations are aware. There are so many languages out there who are about to be extinct or have already been because no more people speak them. And once we lose a language, we lose access to a world of knowledge, which is also the reason why, as a writer, I always encourage my authors, keep your voice intact. Don't settle. Don't try to sound differently. Voice is everything when it comes to writing a book. And every author has their own unique voice. And my job as their editor or ghostwriter is to make sure that they embrace it and shine it through their written words.
Beautiful. You've taught us so many things in your story and answering the question today. Embracing our uniqueness, being who we are, celebrating each other, being proud of where we're from, being proud of the multifaceted nature of our journey, of our upbringing. And I thank you so much for sharing your story with us today. I put your information in the show notes, but I would love for you to tell our audience where they can find you today.
Of course. So my website is www.brunellacostagliola.com.
Very good. Thank you so much, Brunella, for being here today. I really appreciate you. I thank all of you for watching or listening wherever you are in the world. I'm your host, Jessica Dugas, and I'll see you next time for another episode of One Guest, One Story, One Question, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.